Geonosis, 22 BBY. The arena floor is still burning from the first Jedi engagement when the real machines arrive. The Battle of Geonosis started with 100 Jedi materializing across an execution arena in a planet-side ambush that almost worked. Almost being the operative word. By the time Republic gunships dropped clones into the desert and the fighting broke into open terrain, both sides were improvising. Clones repositioning against droid formations, Jedi commandeering vehicles they'd never trained in, general chaos unfolding across kilometers of red Geonosian rock. And then, cresting the ridge at the edge of the arena field, something that didn't belong in that tactical picture at all. Two enormous hoop-like wheels, each one taller than a standing trooper, spinning across the dust at speed. Between them, a compact weapons body carrying twin missile racks loaded with up to 30 tracking rockets. No cockpit, no visible crew access. Nothing that resembles a conventional ground vehicle's design language. The IG-227 Hailfire-class droid tank moved the way that certain threats move. All forward momentum, nothing wasted on looking approachable. When those missiles came off the racks, lifting in sequence, arcing through desert air before impact, tracking, every person watching Attack of the Clones in 2002 processed something below the level of conscious analysis. That machine didn't look like it was trying to win a battle. It looked like it was communicating a consequence. The bad guys had better machines. More interesting machines. Machines that looked like they came from somewhere the Republic's designers had never visited. That feeling has followed prequel fans for over 20 years. It surfaces in arguments about faction aesthetics, in discussions about why the prequel era produced hardware that nothing else in Star Wars quite matches, in the persistent, low-grade frustration that nobody has fully explained it. The consensus isn't wrong. What's been missing is the structural argument beneath it, the in-universe answer to why these specific corporations, building for this specific coalition, consistently produced hardware that looks darker and more psychologically aggressive than anything the Republic fielded. The canonical record has that answer. It lives in the origins of individual vehicles, who built them, who commissioned them, and what they were originally designed to do before the Clone Wars gave them a war to fight. Follow those corporate mandates backward through the Separatist Alliance's military-industrial complex, and a pattern emerges that looks less like coincidence and more like function. Every major Separatist vehicle was built by a corporation that needed its machines to make organic beings comply. Not military opponents, but civilian populations, debtors, governments that had made the mistake of standing between a trade consortium and its profit margin. When compliance is the design requirement, and the target isn't a soldier, fear is the mechanism. When fear is the mechanism, the design follows. The thesis is that simple. The evidence starts with what the Republic built. The Galactic Republic's primary ground vehicle manufacturer was Rathana Heavy Engineering. Their flagship product was the ATTE, All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer, a multi-purpose assault vehicle built for the full range of demands a professional ground campaign places on armor. Rathana also produced the Acclamator-class transgalactic military assault ships and was later documented as the design originator for hardware that evolved directly into the Empire's AT-AT. The ATTE sits at the origin of that lineage, which means it's the most modest entry in a sequence that eventually produces some of Star Wars' most recognized silhouettes. In 22 BBY, it was a heavily armored walker with a gun on top. Competent, dependable. Rathana's design language communicates what military procurement produces when the client is a state with legitimate institutional requirements. Clarity, durability, reliability at scale. The ATTE looks like it belongs to a professional army, because it was built for one. Every specification answers a battlefield question. The armored hull solves for crew protection in sustained engagement. Strip away the sci-fi context, and what you're looking at is the outcome of a procurement process where engineers received a list of military requirements and met them efficiently. The design is legible in the specific sense that it tells you exactly what it is and nothing more. There is no visual element that exceeds the stated use case. The LAAT/I gunship completes the picture from the air. Functional design with no element that exceeds its specified role. It moves clones from one position to another under fire, and it looks exactly like something built to do that. Standardized. Optimized. Visually coherent with everything else in the Republic's arsenal because all of it came from the same centralized procurement culture with the same institutional client. What's consistent across Republic hardware is the complete absence of anything communicating psychological threat to a non-military observer. These vehicles project state power, institutional capability, the visual language of an organized government's military apparatus. Nothing in Rathana's product line produces the visceral response that a machine generates when its design suggests it was built for something other than conventional military engagement. The reason is structural. Rathana built for a professional military fighting professional militaries, under a procurement mandate that prioritized effectiveness in military conditions governed by military doctrine. That mandate produces competent, visually consistent hardware that communicates exactly one thing to anyone watching it arrive. This state has organized force. It doesn't communicate anything darker than that, because nothing darker than that was in the design brief. The Armored Assault Tank. AAT-1, manufacturer Bactoid Armor Workshop, arrived in public consciousness in 1999, rolling across the green fields of Naboo with the Trade Federation's invasion force. Before Geonosis, before the Clone Wars series, before any of the expanded canonical material that would follow over the next 2 decades, those tanks established the baseline of what the CIS aesthetic was going to feel like. The design impression has held up. The explanation for why it exists hasn't been told fully. Bactoid specifications for the AAT-1 were these: 9.75 meters long, maximum speed of 55 kilometers per hour, propulsion via repulsor lift systems allowing the vehicle to hover over obstacles rather than navigate across them, a crew of 4 battle droids, driver, commander, and 2 gunners, primary armament of 1 heavy laser cannon, supported by 2 repeating blasters, 2 light blasters, and 6 grenade launchers. Total shell payload of 57 rounds. Heavy frontal armor documented in the Legends record as capable of plowing through walls. Rear-positioned power systems protected during sustained engagement. A crew complement of 6 additional B-1 battle droids on external handholds, ready for rapid infantry deployment. Those specifications describe a capable, well-armed frontline assault vehicle. They don't explain the silhouette. The AAT's body is broad and organic-seeming, tapering toward a raised forward section that narrows to the primary weapon mount, a profile that reads as predatory in a way that's difficult to isolate to any single design element. There are no viewports anywhere on the exterior, no glass, no visual accommodation for a biological crew, because the crew have no biological requirement for visual access. 4 battle droids operate the vehicle through their own sensor systems, which means the design was never constrained by where human eyes need to be positioned, where human hands need to reach controls, where a human-scale hatch needs to open. The freedom from biological crew ergonomics is visible and legible in the result, even to observers who can't name it. The AAT doesn't look like a vehicle designed around a person inside it, because it wasn't. The repulsor lift propulsion compounds this. The AAT doesn't rumble across terrain the way tracked vehicles do. Repulsor lift systems allow it to hover, level, smooth. The weapon's platform stable in a way that carries its own unsettling quality. A tracked tank crossing broken ground produces visual noise. It rocks. It lurches. It negotiates physically with its environment. The AAT moves without negotiating anything, gliding at a constant height that communicates indifference to whatever the terrain beneath it's doing. Watching it in the Naboo sequences, crossing grass and road and courtyard at the same unvarying elevation, there's a quality of inevitability about the movement that a vehicle with wheels or tracks couldn't replicate. Bactoid Armor Workshop's documented pre-war mandate was civilian. rugged, all-terrain ground vehicles for civilian logistics, durable and practical, the kind of hardware a shipping conglomerate needed for planetary surface operations. The Trade Federation converted that manufacturing capacity for a specific military need, invading and occupying a planet whose queen had refused to ratify a taxation treaty. The Trade Federation blockaded Naboo and deployed forces not to destroy a standing army in the field, but to compel a head of state to sign a document. The AAT rolled through inhabited Naboo infrastructure as a physical argument for governmental compliance. Naboo's security chief, Captain Panaka, a trained military officer with institutional knowledge of what conventional military hardware looked like, described the Trade Federation's deployed forces as a fearsome sight on any battlefield. That's the reaction of a professional to something that exceeded his professional frame of reference. The AAT was built to produce that reaction, not by any stated design mandate, but by the natural consequence of building an occupation instrument for targets whose primary characteristic was that they weren't planning to fight back in any conventional military sense. When the target population is civilians and functionaries, the machine that makes them comply is the machine that makes them afraid. Bactoid's engineering produced exactly that, and did so because the Trade Federation's use case demanded it, even if the design brief never articulated it in those terms. This is the first version of the design principle. The AAT makes compliance feel physiologically rational. Seeing one arrive, in number, hovering at constant height across terrain it doesn't have to negotiate, you understand immediately why governmental resistance to the Trade Federation's terms would be a form of biological irrationality. The machine communicates that before a single shot is fired. The most important structural fact about the Separatist military is one that lore-level analyses consistently underweight. The Confederacy of Independent Systems didn't have a defense department. It had corporations. Bactoid Armor Workshop was simultaneously documented as Trade Federation-owned and as a subsidiary of the Techno-Union, two of the alliance's major corporate pillars sharing controlling interest in the same manufacturer. Bactoid produced the AAT, the multi-troop transport, and the B-1 droid infantry that tied them into an occupation army. The Techno-Union, described in Star Wars canon as a megacorporation composed of various technology firms, led during the Clone Wars by Foreman Wat Tambor, brought its own engineering culture and hardware. The intergalactic banking clan arrived with an entirely separate category of combat automata, built independently of Bactoid and reflecting completely different design priorities. The Commerce Guild and Hayor Chal Engineering each contributed from their own manufacturing traditions. The corporate alliance added further hardware from its economic infrastructure. That fragmentation, which by conventional military doctrine should produce incompatible, logistically nightmarish equipment, paradoxically generated the aesthetic variety that defines the Separatist arsenal. The AAT and the Hailfire look nothing alike. The Hailfire and the defoliator look nothing alike. The defoliator and the spider droids from the Commerce Guild share almost no visual DNA whatsoever. Each vehicle arrived carrying its own design logic, shaped by the corporation that commissioned it, optimized for that corporation's original operational requirements. The Republic's centralized manufacturing produced the opposite result. Rathana Heavy Engineering's product line is visually coherent across every entry, all of it recognizably from the same design culture, all of it serving the same institutional client with the same baseline requirements. That coherence is exactly what a state military procurement program should produce. It's also why the products read as a single aesthetic category, rather than as a collection of individually distinct machines. The CIS didn't have a procurement doctrine that could enforce visual consistency. It had a coalition where each corporate member brought its own weapons and kept building more of them according to its own design logic. The variety is structural. It would have been impossible to avoid, and it points directly to why each vehicle looks the way it does, because each one came from a corporation that was solving a different original problem. Those original problems all reduce to the same underlying mandate when you follow them back far enough. The Trade Federation needed instruments for compelling civilian governments over trade disputes. The banking clan needed instruments for compelling debtors who hadn't paid. The Techno-Union needed instruments for protecting economic territories from populations that might resist corporate extraction. None of these are military-on-military applications. All of them require making organic populations afraid of non-compliance. The convergence of those mandates across 5 separate corporations is the systemic answer to the title's parenthetical. It's by design. Not one corporation's design philosophy, but the shared logic of an entire category of institution, expressed through the hardware each brought to the coalition. The IG-227 Hailfire-class droid tank made its debut at Geonosis, and the image has stayed with prequel fans since 2002. Those 2 enormous hoop wheels spinning across Red Desert, the missile racks tracking upward, the projectiles lifting in sequence and arcing before impact. The design is so committed to its own internal logic, 2 massive drive wheels with a compact weapons platform suspended between them, no cockpit, no crew access, nothing conceding to conventional vehicle readability, that it immediately reads as something built around a constraint that has nothing to do with standard military hardware design. Walking up to an IG-227 in the field, what you'd be looking at is approximately 2 stories of spinning wheel on each side, a missile body at the center, and complete silence from any position where a crew should be. No hatch, no viewport, no concession anywhere in the design to the possibility that a person might need to operate it. That constraint is real, and its origin explains everything about why the machine looks the way it does. The official Star Wars databank, canonical sourcing from StarWars.com, describes the Hailfire as originally constructed by the intergalactic banking clan to collect. The Canon Wiki provides the operational context. The banking clan deployed them if individuals didn't pay their owed money. The Legends documentation places the Hailfire droids exclusively within the banking clan's Collections and Security Division prior to the Clone Wars, meaning the vehicle's entire original operational context had nothing to do with military engagement in the conventional sense. The Intergalactic Banking Clan, described in canon as a financial commerce guild governed from its main vault on the planet Scipio, built a self-propelled, autonomous missile platform carrying up to 30 tracking rockets as a debt collection instrument. Reconstruct what that deployment looked like from the debtor's perspective. You've defaulted on a loan from a galactic financial institution. The banking clan has exhausted its interest in negotiation. What arrives at your location is an autonomous vehicle on hoop wheels, carrying no biological crew, loaded with 30 tracking rockets, with nothing inside it that can be appealed to, reasoned with, or persuaded. There's no officer to whom you present extenuating circumstances. There's no representative empowered to accept a payment arrangement. The machine has arrived to execute a programmatic outcome, and the only variable is whether that outcome unfolds. The design makes perfect sense from a corporate enforcement standpoint. A conventional armed escort communicates that the institution is serious about the debt. An IG-227 communicates something categorically different. There is no negotiation with this machine because there is nothing inside it capable of negotiating. The distinction between those 2 communications is the distinction between a warning and a fait accompli. The banking clan didn't send Hailfires to win fights. It sent them to prevent fights from starting by making the alternative look biologically untenable. If the machine's presence achieved the required psychological result, the missiles never needed to fire. The machine's appearance was itself the collection mechanism. This is corporate coercion at its most mechanically refined. An institution that had translated its leverage over clients into physical form and deployed it autonomously. When the Intergalactic Banking Clan joined the Confederacy of Independent Systems and committed its hardware to the combined separatist cause, the Hailfire required no redesign for military duty. Its original mandate, autonomous compulsion of non-military targets through credible, overwhelming force, mapped directly onto what the Separatist coalition needed from mobile weapons platforms operating against Republic positions and civilian infrastructure. The machines that crossed Geonosis in 22 BBY were performing, in a broader military context, the same fundamental function they'd always performed. Arriving at a location, establishing visually and immediately that resistance was irrational, and leaving organic beings with one reasonable response. The Republic had nothing equivalent to the Hailfire, because no institutional equivalent existed in its procurement structure. The ATTE was designed to defeat enemy armor, traverse broken terrain, and support infantry operations in sustained engagement. Because Rathana heavy engineering built for a military force with military requirements. The banking clan built the IG-227 because a financial institution needed its clients compliant, and brought that machine to a war it turned out to be perfectly calibrated for. Before the prosecution rests on the strongest piece of evidence, a brief concession that makes the larger case more honest. The B-1 battle droid looks bad. Placed next to a Phase 2 clone trooper, the clean white helmet, the disciplined silhouette, the visual language of a professional elite force, the B-1 doesn't register as a threat. It registers as a budget constraint made physical. Thin, beige, proportionally unsuited for intimidation, and designed to move and communicate in ways that actively undercut the psychological impact the CIS war machines might otherwise project. The classic battlefield image of B-1s trotting forward in formation, arms out at their sides, occasionally saying, "Roger, Roger," is many things. Terrifying isn't one of them. The reason is explicit. The B-1 was optimized for mass production economics. Cheap to manufacture, cheap to replace, deployed in numbers that compensated for individual fragility. There are conflicting accounts in the canonical record about the B-1's visual design origins. One source describes them as resembling Nemoidian physiognomy, another attributes the appearance to Geonosian designers, and reconciling those accounts isn't straightforward from available sources. But regardless of which design origin is accurate, the most legible mandate in the final product is cost minimization. It looks like the cheapest viable option, because cheapness was the requirement. That is a design decision, and it produced a result that communicates exactly what it is. The B-1 exception doesn't undermine the broader argument. It clarifies the line between where the separatist aesthetic operates and where it doesn't. The droids were the expendable attrition layer, built to be replaced faster than they could be eliminated. The vehicles were corporate capital investments, and capital investments reflect the mandate of the institution that made them, because a corporation doesn't spend serious money on hardware that doesn't serve a serious purpose. Concede the B-1. It's the exception that shows what the rule covers. The defoliator deployment tank is the most important vehicle in this argument, and it's the one the lore community has most consistently understated. Its origin is documented. The defoliator is a modified armored assault tank chassis, designed by a Nemoidian weapons developer named Lok Durd. The weapon itself, referred to in the canonical record as the defoliator, fires a supercharged energy blast capable of destroying organic matter while leaving machinery intact. Deployed on a battlefield with both clone troopers and battle droids present, the weapon kills the biological combatants and leaves the mechanical ones functional. The design discriminates between biological and mechanical life in real time and eliminates the former while preserving the latter. The defoliator first appeared in the Clone Wars episode titled Defenders of Peace, where Lok Durd oversaw its field test as a new addition to the Separatist arsenal. The episode established the weapon's function, its delivery platform, and Durd's role as its designer and operational tester. Standing approximately 12 meters tall and over 18 meters long, the vehicle carried its primary weapon in an enormous plasma cannon, requiring the forward section of the vehicle to expose itself for each firing cycle, a documented tactical vulnerability that the vehicle's designers accepted as the cost of delivering the weapon at sufficient range. For most viewers and most subsequent lore coverage, Defenders of Peace has functioned as the primary defoliator episode, the prototype test, the proof of concept deployment, the experiment. It's the natural frame. A new weapon appears, it's tested under supervised conditions, and the story moves on. The implication, often left unchallenged in lore discussions, is that the defoliator was an exceptional case, a superweapon prototype rather than a production military asset. The canonical record does not support that framing. It extends to a different planet, under a different command order, with different targets, years later in the conflict. The Clone Wars, Season 4, Episode 19. Title: Massacre. In-universe year, 20 BBY. Planet: Dathomir. Count Dooku ordered the assault. General Grievous, Supreme Marshal Commander of the Separatist droid armies, executed it. The target was Mother Talzin's Night Sister Coven, a community of force-sensitive witches on a world with no conventional military infrastructure, no armor, no anti-air defense, no institutional capacity to resist what was being sent. The proximate cause was Asajj Ventress. She had returned to Dathomir, and eliminating the Night Sisters removed any possibility of Ventress rebuilding a power base from which she could threaten Dooku's position. The Coven was leverage. Destroying them eliminated her options permanently. Grievous sent out a group of defoliator tanks to wipe out their opponents with one stroke. The episode is documented across multiple independent contemporary sources. The Star Wars Reports Review, published at Original Broadcast in 2012, specifically noted the return of the Defenders of Peace defoliator tank, treating the Season 4 appearance not as an anomaly, but as a confirmed reappearance of the established vehicle class. The wording is worth noting. The reviewer wrote that it's always great to see stuff from past seasons show up in current episodes, framing the Dathomir deployment as a satisfying canonical continuity rather than a surprise lore development. The vehicle wasn't a secret weapon being rolled out for a special occasion. It was recognizable hardware deployed in the field. The script's claim about mass production requires calibrated framing. Whether the Dathomir units were definitively mass-produced variants distinct from the original test unit, that specific distinction can't be resolved from available canonical sourcing. The research is explicit on this point, and the script honors it. What can be said with confidence is this: a group of defoliator tanks appearing on a separate planet, executing a separate mission under a separate command order at a later point in the conflict, points strongly toward a weapon that had extended well beyond a single experimental unit. A prototype under active development doesn't get deployed in plural on a secondary campaign against targets on a different world. The visual evidence in the episode, multiple vehicles, a coordinated deployment, a military asset being used as a standard tactical tool rather than a rare instrument, is the strongest available evidence about what had happened to the vehicle between Defenders of Peace and Massacre. The Wikipedia article on the defoliator describes it as a weapon designed to destroy organic matter while leaving machinery intact. And the last of the droid's wiki describes it as a superweapon used and created by Lok Durd and Count Dooku during the Clone Wars era. That phrasing, during the Clone Wars era, spanning the conflict rather than localizing to a single episode, reflects a weapon with a documented operational history, not a one-time test. Now look at what Grievous chose to deploy it against on Dathomir. The Night Sisters were a coven, not a military force. They had force capabilities, Night Spider mounts, and whatever resources Mother Talzin could marshal through Dathomiri magic. What they didn't have was armor, artillery, armored vehicles, or any conventional defensive infrastructure against a separatist droid army backed by weapons systems designed for exactly this kind of asymmetric engagement. The defoliator's defining characteristic, targeting organic life while preserving machines, was optimized for mixed battlefields, where distinguishing between biological and mechanical combatants mattered. On Dathomir, there was no mixed battlefield. The Night Sisters had no machines worth preserving. There were only biological targets. Grievous deployed the defoliator anyway. The weapon designed to eliminate organic life while preserving mechanical infrastructure was sent to a world where organic elimination was the entire mission. The selection communicates a logic. On Dathomir, the defoliator's anti-organic function wasn't a side constraint or a limitation of the weapon system. It was precisely the capability that made it the right instrument for what Count Dooku had ordered. Strip a world of its biological population. Leave the material landscape. Ensure that what remains can't be used to rebuild anything Dooku wants destroyed. That is what a defoliator does, and that is what it was ordered to do on Dathomir in 20 BBY. The canonical aftermath is documented through Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which places Cal Kestis on Dathomir years after these events. Players who explored that version of the planet encountered a world of complete ruins, ghost architecture, absent wildlife, a dead silent landscape with nothing actively inhabiting it. The defoliator doesn't produce a defeated population that can be governed. It produces an erased one. Nothing to recover from, because there is nothing left to do the recovering. The defoliator is the clearest available case study for what Separatist weapons were built to do when given operational freedom. A weapon designed to destroy biological life categorically while preserving machines, introduced by a weapons developer working inside the Separatist military structure, deployed in the field in massacre against a non-military population that had no armor or air defense, on a direct order from Dooku to Grievous, in the service of eliminating a coven that represented political leverage. The canonical record for that episode isn't disputed. 5 separate contemporary reviews and episode guides document the same deployment. The vehicle class is named. The order chain is confirmed. The targets are identified. The result is visible in a subsequent canonical property. Lore channels that have treated the defoliator as a prototype that never reached meaningful military deployment beyond its Defenders of Peace test have the canonical record backwards. Season 4, Episode 19 isn't a footnote. It's evidence that the vehicle was an active, field-deployable weapon, used for exactly the purpose its design was optimized for: the elimination of organic life, on a mission whose context makes that optimization not merely incidental, but deliberate. Step back from the 3 vehicles and the corporate structure beneath them, and the pattern is fully legible. Bactoid Armor Workshop, building primarily for the Trade Federation, designed the AAT for a corporation that invaded civilian governments over trade disputes. The vehicle's repulsor lift stability, its crewless exterior, its predatory hovering profile, all of it serves an occupation mission where the primary target was civilian morale and governmental resolve. The Trade Federation deployed it to make a queen sign a treaty. The vehicle's appearance was calibrated, functionally, if not intentionally, to make non-compliance feel biologically irrational. The intergalactic banking clan built the Hailfire for its collections department, a mobile autonomous missile platform optimized for arriving at the location of non-compliant debtors and communicating, immediately and visually, that the debtors' options had narrowed to 1. The design solution for debt collection turned out to be identical to the design solution for military compulsion, which tells you something significant about what those 2 activities share at their structural core. Lockdur designed the defoliator within the Separatist weapons development apparatus for a mission profile that extends both of the above. Eliminate organic life categorically while preserving the mechanical infrastructure the Separatists intended to keep. A weapon that makes being biological the sole criterion for elimination. Deployed on Dathomir in Season 4, under Dooku's direct order, against a population with no conventional military assets. The organic targeting function wasn't a constraint, it was the specification. The canonical record doesn't include a memo from a Separatist design committee declaring that all hardware should be engineered to maximize psychological terror against organic populations. No such document exists in the available sourcing, and claiming otherwise would outrun the evidence. The thesis doesn't require that memo. What the canonical record does document is 3 separate corporations with 3 separate original use cases: trade enforcement, debt collection, and targeted biological elimination, all converging on the same functional outcome: machines optimized for affecting the psychology and physiology of organic populations that lack military training and military protection. When the target isn't a soldier, fear is the mechanism of compliance. When fear is the mechanism, the design follows it. In the AAT's hovering predatory silhouette, in the Hailfire's autonomous platform that eliminates the possibility of negotiation by eliminating the negotiating party, in the defoliator's categorical targeting of biological life. The mandate is readable in every vehicle's specifications once you understand what corporate function originally produced it. The Republic's design language doesn't produce those responses, because the Republic's design mandate was categorically different. Rathana heavy engineering built for a professional military, expecting professional military opposition. Every specification answers a military question. The resulting vehicles look like military equipment because military engagement was the use case, start to finish. The CIS corporations weren't primarily building for military-on-military conflict. The Trade Federation invaded a civilian world over a commercial dispute. The banking clan dispatched autonomous missile platforms to address outstanding accounts. The Techno Union and Commerce Guild were protecting economic territories and resource claims from populations that might resist corporate extraction. When those corporations needed weapons, they built for their actual use cases. And their actual use cases were making organic populations understand that non-compliance had a physiological cost. The terror was the mechanism. The mechanism was the mandate. The mandate is legible in the hardware. One detail in the post-Clone Wars record adds a final dimension. The Empire, which inherited power from the Republic and nominally from the wreckage of the conflict, deliberately abandoned the CIS design language. Imperial military design drew on Republic aesthetics, armor, vehicles, and ships that represented a visual evolution of the Grand Army of the Republic's hardware, because the Empire benefited from that association. Presenting itself as the legitimate successor to Republican military tradition, rather than as an inheritor of a corporate insurgency's weapons culture, was politically important to the early Imperial project. The CIS aesthetic, with its fragmented corporate origins and its function-built visual aggression, was buried. The corporations that produced it were dissolved. The machines remained in limited Imperial service. The AAT was adopted by the Empire in the immediate post-war period, but the design culture that produced them wasn't carried forward. The consequence of that abandonment is that separatist vehicles exist in cultural memory as a closed system. They don't evolve into anything visible in the sequel trilogy, or in Andor, or in any contemporary Star Wars property. They existed in the prequel era, fully committed to their own internal design logic, and then they stopped. The Clone Wars ended in 19 BBY. The corporate mandates that produced the CIS arsenal ended with them. What's visible in Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars is the complete record, not a chapter of an ongoing aesthetic, but the entire text of it. The design cultures never had the opportunity to dilute their original logic through sequel adjustments or changing narrative needs. That closure is part of why the vehicles register so distinctly. The AAT that rolled across Naboo in 32 BBY is functionally the same AAT that appears in Clone Wars battles a decade later. The design didn't evolve because the corporate mandate that produced it didn't change. You're seeing the original intention, preserved across the full arc of the conflict, without revision. Corporate military design that emerged from specific use cases and disappeared with the corporations that commissioned it. Return to Geonosis. The hoop wheels at the ridgeline. 22 BBY. Watching Attack of the Clones, you didn't know what the intergalactic banking clan was. You didn't know the machine cresting that ridge had been built to arrive at the addresses of entities that owed money to a galactic financial institution and make the cost of default physical and immediate. You didn't know its twin racks carried up to 30 tracking rockets that had started their service life as instruments of debt enforcement, a consequence delivered at missile velocity. None of that context was available to a viewer in 2002, and it didn't matter, because the design communicated its function before you understood it consciously. The absence of any crew access, the scale of those wheels, the way the missile racks moved without waiting for an operator's decision. The Separatist aesthetic does this consistently, across every vehicle in the arsenal that wasn't built for mass production cost minimization. The AAT's hovering, viewport-free silhouette communicates occupation at a level below tactical analysis. The Hailfire's autonomous platform communicates that there is no one inside this machine whose mind could be changed. The defoliator communicates something more specific still, that the mere fact of being biological is, under certain conditions, a liability the design was built to address. Those aren't accidents of visual design. They are the products of corporations that built machines for specific purposes, all of which reduce to the same core function: making organic populations understand that non-compliance was expensive in physiological terms. The fear was the mechanism. The mechanism was the mandate. And the mandate is visible in the hardware once you know what corporate logic produced it. The Republic built professional military tools for professional military conflicts. The Confederacy of Independent Systems brought its compliance infrastructure to a war it was already equipped to fight, carrying the design logic of trade enforcement, debt collection, and targeted biological elimination into every engagement of the Clone Wars. That's why you remember every single Separatist tank. The Republic was projecting state power. The CIS was projecting something older, more direct, and considerably harder to forget. The visual language of a threat that has already decided the outcome and is only waiting for you to reach the same conclusion. If you want more content that takes Star Wars lore seriously and actually verifies the canonical record before making claims about it, subscribe. New videos go up regularly.